Red for our next interview.
Thanks, Will. I'm William, and I'm joined in Studio Red by Matt Rogan. Matt, good evening.
Good evening, Will. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. But it's not about me, it's about you. What makes you a good fit for Community and Wellbeing Officer?
So, I, for the last 2 years, have been LGBTQ plus officer with Dan. And in that time, we have seen just so many fantastic wins. For example, the LGBTQ plus club night at Flares, getting more events on for LGBTQ plus students, and actually getting something for the gender neutral toilet business we have on campus. So because of all these fantastic wins that we've managed to achieve, even in a COVID scenario, I believe the next logical step is to be Community and Wellbeing Officer to actually take these wins to every student in York.
That's interesting you say that, because a lot of your manifesto, you talk about your wins as one of the LGBTQ plus officers for the last 2 years.
Yep.
You've been doing that in partnership with Dan.
Yes.
Now you're going to be flying solo if you were successful.
Yeah.
Do you think you can manage?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, working with Dan is, because we're still doing it technically, it's just been the absolutely most fantastic experience, because we both have these brilliant ideas and we bounce off each other so well. So we put this input in and we just get each other, and he has been an absolute rock in running LGBTQ Network. So yeah, and I am really excited at the prospect of doing it by myself. But of course, Dan, not really much of a kept secret, but he is my partner, so he'll be by my side no matter what.
Okay, and so let's look at your manifesto now.
Yes.
You talk about affordable accommodation as one of the first things people reading it will see. You say only less than 1% of student population has rooms for £99 per week or less. Is that have I read that right?
Yes, so the student population of York, the last time I checked, was 22,020. There are between 120 and 140. So if every student were to live on campus or apply for it, then less than 1% would actually get those £99 rooms. But every student is obviously not competing for this. But still, that is just such a small number.
And so what do you think you can do to change that?
So what I want to do to address this is look at where the university can reduce rooms. So I've mentioned Halifax. These rooms are only in Halifax, but that means any students who want to have a place on East Campus, well, that's completely ruled out. So to address this, I also want to look at the fact that students were promised accommodation and ended up in Hull, and the university managed to afford £230,650, according to York Vision. So that number, if you look at the average cost of living for a student in York, which on campus is £6,591.
Where's that number from?
That number is from the university's accommodation website, and that's the average of 40-week lets, because I think that's the majority what students take, and all the options, the average in the middle of that is 6,591. If you put that into the 230 grand, that's 35 students the university could afford to completely cut the rent for. But let's be realistic, that is never going to happen. So as an alternative scenario, the university can then surely afford to lower the rent in different places and still be making the same amount of money, if not more, than when they had to shuttle students between Hull and York in first term.
Do you think you're the person who can have these conversations with the powers that be at the university and convince them of why these changes should be made? Yes,
I do think I'm that person.
Why?
Because I've had a lot of experience in the past, actually, as LGBTQ plus officer working with the university accommodation and estates team. For example, I worked with the estates team on getting better all-gender toilet provisions. And when I went into the conversation with them about getting this better provision, we sat down and we said, OK, this is the issue that we've highlighted in our consultation. And there is clearly something that needs to be done. And when we just sat down and had that conversation, the head of estates at the time said, OK, I want to actually work on this. So I do think when you sit down and just have a conversation with university and say, we need something better for this, and here is a solution, as I've said, 230 grand in one term they can afford. I think if you just offer that solution and work together, then it can happen.
Okay, so one of the other things you mention in your manifesto is about quicker access times for student support plans and exceptional circumstances, you say, should remain evidence-free. Why is that important to you?
Well, the reason I want better access to student support plans is because they are so invaluable to students. Now, I am on one myself, and I won't go into too many details, but I needed it earlier this year. And
just for people who might not know, what is a student support plan?
So a student support plan is basically something you draw up with someone at the university, and it's basically if things go wrong, it's how they can mitigate these things happening. So, for example, it could be occasional extensions on open assessments by about 2 weeks with exams. So it's just something that's in place and tailored to a student so that if these things go wrong, there's something in place for them. And the reason I want to have quicker access times is because, as I said, these are invaluable. And for some students, this could be the difference between getting the best possible grade and them falling short. And no one should have to go through that based on these exceptional circumstances that affect students.
There is an argument here that if you keep exceptional circumstances evidence-free, people could exploit that. What do you say to that?
Well, yes, it could be exploited per se, but that shouldn't have to take away from those who genuinely need it.
So the reason that is why in the past it has been evidence-based is because then somebody is able to make a decision. Do you?
However, one thing I would interject on that with is if there is a student going through something in a short-term period, getting something from, say, a doctor's surgery, that requires finance, so 30 quid, 40 quid for a doctor's note, and then there's also the wait time for that. If it's too late, then that is a far worse problem, in my opinion, than students who will be exploiting it, because that is someone, again, this is the difference between their grade being the best it can be and not because of something out of their control.
Okay. We've already spoken a little bit about buses. You're talking about the money spent between Hull and York last term. But you're also interested in the buses in York. It seems community and wellbeing officers are forever burdened with buses. What could you end our problems with buses in York?
Well, I'm not going to promise that I'm going to end it because I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. But what I will promise is that I will lobby First Buses better, because as we've seen recently, they've put their prices up, which means that they're making more money whilst we're getting the same service, where buses are overcrowded, which I didn't say this in my manifesto, but from a COVID perspective, that is just fairly unsafe. And also, if their prices are going up, but we're not getting the value for money, then that shows there is a clear inequality, and I will address that. And one thing I would say is that to solve the issue of overcrowding, the 66 and 67 currently, that it's free between campus and then goes on into town, a simple solution would be bring back the UB2 and have that free between campus, and then in addition to the 66 and 67 running, because they have more income now, First Buses, from the prices going up. And if they could do it last year, then I would argue they're able to do it this year.
Okay, I want to ask you, we're into the last minute now.
Of course.
What do you make of the, if you were elected, your predecessor would be Kelly Barr, who's the current Community and Wellbeing Officer. What do you make of Kelly's work in the role?
I think Kelly's work in the role has been absolutely fantastic. She's taken just such a wonderful approach to the role. She's been so willing to work with everyone across the board. And that's what I want to do as well. I want to be working with everyone to get the best possible things we can for students. And that's something from Kelly that I really admire, how she's wanted to work with everyone. And I definitely want to emulate that with myself.
Matt, thank you very much. You gestured that way, which for our viewers on YouTube means something. If you're listening on the radio, perhaps not, but we can now go over to Studio Blue, where Matt Wood-Perkins is joined by Kelly Barr. No, it's not Matt. It's
No, he's
Scarlett.
not.
I beg